One thing that the advent of Yakuza meme culture has taught us is that certain activities in the games are so frequently criticized that raging out over them became a rite of passage in the community. Hostess Maker, tailing missions, Catfight Club, every game in this beautiful franchise has that one thing that became a hilarious point of contention within it. But one minigame's infamy has raised it above them all, even making it an emblem of ironic community stardom. We're talking about none other than Mahjong, the bane of many a trophy hunter and Yakuza newcomer. Now, full disclosure, I fall into the minority of players that genuinely adores this minigame, but the legacy Mahjong has in our community is so unique that it had to be addressed in its own video. So, whether this is your first time hearing of the minigame, or if you're already a master at it, join us as we try to answer the question, why is Mahjong so hated? To start things off, here's a dramatic retelling of an average player's first exposure to the minigame. Imagine walking into this establishment for the first time, being curious about the rules of Mahjong, only to be met by this. Yeah, not as welcoming as the karaoke tutorial, but that's fine. Maybe you can simplify all of this by drawing parallels with a game you already know. Like, how about you treat the tiles as a set of cards with unique suits? Sure, that could work. Alright, how many quote-unquote suits are there? Well, there's regular tiles and Onna tiles, which sounds simple enough. But then regular tiles are divided into bamboos, circles and characters, while Onna tiles are divided into winds and dragons. And when you look at the intricate designs behind the Onna tiles, you'll probably just think, it might take me a while to remember all of the kanji for each wind tile. Maybe I'll just put the Onna tiles to the side for the time and focus on the regulars. I mean, bamboos and circles do look pretty self-explanatory, and you can physically count out their number from a given tile, if you're still stuck. Alright, what about the character Maybe I'll just play blackjack instead. The reason for this retelling being so convoluted and, for lack of a better word, discouraging, was to illustrate the type of experience I've seen transpire numerous times with people just getting into Mahjong. While there are parallels that you can draw with a game like Rummy, for example, Mahjong really is its own beast, and one that feels immensely more rewarding to come to grips with by nature of its unique eccentricities. The first quote-unquote obstacle for you will obviously be getting used to the tile designs, a matter that is made a bit easier thanks to Yakuza auto-sorting the tiles from smaller to greater values, meaning that after a while, everything will just click into place, as you slowly familiarize yourself with the Onnas while playing around with various sequences of bamboos or circles. Keep in mind though, we're just talking about the tiles themselves here, and this is usually the point where most people step away from learning the minigame altogether. But when you look at Mahjong's actual rule set, this is where the real confusion begins. I'd like to use Yakuza 0's help tips as an example here, seeing as this game's iteration of Mahjong was likely the first exposure to it for many fans, and one that was uniquely flawed in a number of ways. I'm sure you heard the word Riichi get thrown around countless times when observing discourse on this minigame. To keep it simple, it means that your playing hand is one tile away from winning, leading to the rest of that round playing out in an automated manner until you come across the tile you need. This mechanic is so important that it is used to differentiate the Japanese version of Mahjong, i.e. Riichi Mahjong, from other types of the game, like for example, the Chinese iteration. So, imagine my surprise flipping through the rules of Yakuza 0's tutorial only to realize Riichi isn't mentioned anywhere. There's also the fact that things like pawn are spelled differently here than in other versions of the minigame, the fact that tiles can be labeled in different ways depending on player preference, and obviously things like the value of a given hand, requiring you to essentially look up a glossary every 5 minutes while playing the game as a newcomer. You have a lot of things going against you, making this stage of learning the game the second most frequent point where most people tend to throw in the towel. But let's say you wound up mastering the rules as well. You know how to build a winning hand. You ignore most on-screen indicators because you know calling Riichi is the way to go. Even then, there is still one trick up Mahjong's sleeve that will nonetheless infuriate you. The pure bloody RNG of it all. This becomes a never-increasing issue the more time you spend on finishing off your completion list, as a number of Yakuza games require you to win a game of Mahjong with specific hands to fulfill your platinum requirements. So on top of hoping for very specific tiles to come your way, you obviously need to pray that your opponents don't end the round outright by stealing one of your tiles prematurely. You obviously can't see what tiles your opponents have in their hands, nor how close they may be to calling Riichi themselves. And while you may make educated guesses based on their respective discard piles, the RNG will most likely pull the equivalent of a tiger drop on you regardless. The Dragon Engine in particular has been infuriating in this regard, cause it felt like 9 times out of 10, the moment I called Riichi would be the moment everyone else at the table would suddenly decide that they have a perfect hand as well, and then run each other until the end of time. Knowing this, a number of people watching this part of the video will likely go, well, if it's just dependent on RNG in the end, why bother learning the game in the first place? And this is where the tone of the script will likely become a lot more positive than it was up to now. As you may already know, I've platinumed nearly every game in the franchise, which means I've spent my fair share of hours wrestling with different completion requirements over the years. In theory, this should also mean that I know how to properly play Mahjong, but really, I don't. Put me in a real match with a table that isn't automated, and I'll be as lost as Kiryu was in the Be My Baby sub-story. However, this doesn't mean that Yakuza's iteration of Mahjong is some insurmountable wall unless you know every single tile combination by heart. Most people get enraged at this minigame because they treat it as an all-or-nothing type of element, prohibiting them from claiming a well-deserved platinum trophy they invested tens, if not hundreds of hours into. It's this sense of urgency, coupled with the roadblocks we mentioned before, that elevated this minigame into the position it currently holds, one that has thankfully taken on a more positive meaning thanks to the community's sense of humor towards it, and a number of fans of the series taking it upon themselves to try and understand what Mahjong is all about, thus lending a helping hand to everyone else that was curious about it. Like many others, I've started my journey with this minigame with SEGA's guides. And between him presenting the basics of this rather complex activity in a digestible manner, coupled with his relaxed demeanor while streaming said activity on his YouTube channel, I started looking at Mahjong as less of an obstacle per se, and more of a fun challenge. With time, I was winning more and more rounds in a casual manner, and ticking off one completion requirement after the next, until eventually, I was genuinely looking forward to playing Mahjong again, when I went on to tackle the other Yakuza Platinums. Before I knew it, I even started looking for ways to enjoy this oddity outside of this franchise, even playing matches with some fellow Yakuza fans that, like me, were only really versed in quote-unquote video game Mahjong. But each round that was played made me excited at the thought of one day playing it in an IRL setting as well. No on-screen indicators, no completionist pressure, just a group of people having a blast, talking about their experiences with the game, even if everyone around them may still be confused at the mere sight of a Mahjong set. All of this was a gradual process, mind you, so even if your first experience with the activity was negative, you might end up enjoying it somewhere down the line, as long as you don't treat it as something you have to learn. I've seen an increase in people unironically enjoying this game over time, and more often than not, this newfound enjoyment was the result of people casually trying it out. Not worrying about min-maxing completion requirements, but just being curious about this meme that is so omnipresent in the community. We may still misplay from time to time, or rage out over a high-level player pulling a run on us, but it's hard to pinpoint an activity as enticing as Mahjong, once you pass the original obstacles surrounding it. With that in mind, this is likely the point where most people will just ask, well, how do I learn the basics? Where do I get started? For the time being, I'd suggest checking out the minigame section of SEGA's guides and just playing a few rounds in your parlor of choice. Prepare a hot drink, look at your hand, and take it easy, as the meaning behind each tile and button prompt slowly connects with you. If you'd prefer a more definitive crash course right off the bat, there's this extensive tutorial by Hanayori Uta that is often recommended for beginner players. While the length of it might be daunting, the timestamps included should help you out with any particular questions you may have on the game. Really, anything beyond this point, with regards to learning the ropes, is just dependent on how much you're interested in Mahjong and the experiences that may come from it. If you don't click with it after all, at least you gave it a shot. But either way, the community will have your back, either by offering you helpful tips or sending you some fun edits to brighten up your day. Anyway, that's all I really aimed to cover in this video. Let me know your thoughts on Mahjong in the comments, and feel free to share any tips or tricks on it for potential newcomers that may find their way to this video. Either way, thank you for watching. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!